Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Sylvia Cho. I'm the Research Sharing Librarian at the CUNY Graduate Center, and I'm here to talk to you about an alternative to Contour work 3 years after implementing it at a graduate library. First, I have to say I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Okay, since we're going to be discussing alternatives to Contour, let's talk a little bit about Contour itself. This wonderful photo is actually of Contour itself. These are the folks who are members of the National Commission on New Technological Uses of Copyrighted Works, which is what it stands for. And it was a commission that was convened by Congress in the context of the Copyright Act of 1976. It operated between 1975 and 1978, and it included Daniel Burstein, the Librarian of Congress at the time, Library of Congress staff, the Register of Copyrights, legal counsel. The purpose of this group was to determine how the Copyright Act of 1978 should address the changing information landscape within the rise of computers and copy machines at the time. So this commission issued their final report on July 31st, 1978. The full text, by the way, is available at the National Technical Reports Library. So because of their broader charge, they had several sections in this report, but of particular interest for ILL practitioners is that they created the guideline of 5. So the guideline of 5 addresses language in section 108. So in the Copyright Act, the law, Section 108 refers to the reproduction of libraries and archives, which is a limitation on the exclusive copyright. And it is what interlibrary loan is legally based on, along with Section 109, which is the first sale doctrine. So Section 108 contains language about avoiding systematic reproduction in such aggregate quantities as to substitute for a subscription as an interlibrary loan activity that's permissible. However, the law, Section 108, did not define what those terms meant, and Contour helped interpret the law and produce the guideline of 5 based on the study that they did, a review of the Journal Publishing Economics and library budgets at the time. In particular, they mentioned, for example, the 1975 Fry-White study, which was a series of survey studies that covered the years of 1969, 1971, and 1973, and in which they asked a series of questions about these topics to US scholarly and research journals and academic, public, and special libraries in the US. So by considering those market conditions and concluding that the guideline of 5 would provide safe harbor to libraries so that they can provide copies of up to 5 articles from each journal for the most recent 5 years, knowing that they were well within an interpretation of the law that was current at the time. It's also important to note that they recognized that technology and markets would change, and that they thought that the guidelines had to be revised every 5 years. Unfortunately, that never occurred, even though there were subsequent attempts to rethink Section 108 itself. The US Copyright Office convened a study group in 2005 and some meetings in 2016, but nothing concrete has happened on the side of Congress. So the law remains the same, and the guidelines were never updated from the 70s. The guidelines interpreting them were never updated from the 70s. Okay, so then we have to talk about the 2020 white paper, which is another important document in our discussion. So in this 2020 white paper, Meg Oakley, Laura Quilter, and Sarah Benson reviewed the history and context of the Contour guidelines, reminding us that the guidelines are just that, a guideline for interpreting the law. They never had the force of law, and it is an interpretation of the law based on market facts that are now very outdated. They are over 40 years old. And that the guidelines were supposed to be reevaluated and readjusted periodically after that, but that never took place. So I'm going to quote directly. Oakley, Coulter, and Benson say, for decades, libraries followed the guidelines, mechanically paying ever-increasing fees based on a formula, the rule of 5, premised on such historical data as average annual subscription costs ranging from $13 to $108, and copyright fees around $1.25 per article. The rule of 5, for instance, was developed with the understanding that a typical crossover point for the ad drop decision is 4 or 5 uses per journal title per year, with a subscription price of $40 and external lending fees of $8. And they also add, clearly, times have changed. You may notice here, if you work at a library, you know that we do not find those subscription prices, far from it today. And also I find the ratio very interesting. I feel like the subscription costs have gone up much more significantly than the ILL borrowing costs. All of this is described in the white paper, which again is available online on the ARL website. And I highly recommend that you check it out if you haven't already. And after reviewing this history and context, they propose rethinking our practices that are currently based on Kontu guidelines, but perhaps we should think about alternatives. Along with their launching of the white paper on the same day, they published this blog post, which is short, but I found a really interesting supplementary reading to the white paper, because in addition to summarizing, what the white paper is about, they give a number of interesting questions, prompting questions for library staff to ask. And I can't quote all of it because it's very long, and I encourage you to go look at it. Again, it's available openly online. But for example, they mention questions such as, how do you decide to subscribe to journals? What metrics can you consider to determine whether your library is borrowing in such aggregate quantities as to substitute for a subscription? What would your library's crossover point be today? A very important question, I think. How can your library be a good faith participant in the market for scholarly publications? In other words, how can your library best incentivize and support the creation and publication of scholarship and new knowledge, which is the ultimate purpose of copyright? Are there times when fair use, Section 107, should be considered in the context of particular ILL transactions or more generally in policy? Are there times or reasons why the Kontu guidelines would be better than relying on the standards set forth on the statute, such aggregate quantities as to substitute for a subscription to or purchase of the work, which is the only language that is law that we have? So all these are excellent questions, I think, to consider and ask. So folks have done just that. So there have been folks who have presented on their use cases on how they reconsidered and implemented alternative policies. And this happened even before the white paper was released, but also after. So here are a sample of them. I recommend you to seek out each of these, because they're very well worth a read. But this is what I took away from them myself. So, for example, in the Amanda Rudd and Brian Milner presentation that was given in 2019 in the OCLC Research Sharing Conference, Amanda, by the way, is from the same institution as one of the co-authors of the white paper. And in this presentation between the two of them, they discussed an overview of Kontu, the reason to seek alternatives, the process they took to craft a policy, an alternative policy. And really interestingly, in Amanda's case, she discussed a new chain of reviews for fair use, so that it is no longer just at the ILO office. Brian went into detail about, their new process and workflow, and how they review their spreadsheets in the context of subscription costs and copyright fees, etc. Both very useful portions. So Bregan Abernethy, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from Georgia State University, also gave a presentation. And what they did was to review their actual borrowing data to see whether they were serving well the purpose of the law in the aggregate quantities, so as to et cetera, and how close or far off they were. And as a result of their data review, they updated their policy. And in their new policy, they consider the copyright price, and they consider all years instead of just the last 5, and they do a quarterly review. And also, Kay Zdebski and Laura Quilter from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst published an article. And Laura, by the way, is one of the co-authors of the white paper again. And in this paper, what was most interesting to me was that they developed an algorithm so that they can automate the process to handle a large volume, which is very useful. And also they focus on the ratio of requests to the number of articles published, because they observe that journals publish in different frequencies and they publish different amounts of articles. So, so that should be relevant in our consideration as well. And they also added some checks to for titles that are especially frequently requested. So these were all interesting presentations that gave something to learn. So I do recommend them. They are in the references on slide 11. So now coming back to the Graduate Center, I need to tell you a little bit about us because it gives us some characteristics to our requesting pattern. So the Graduate Center is part of the City University of New York system, or CUNY, and it was established in 1961 as the first publicly supported doctoral program in New York City. So you can see the focus on doctoral education from the beginning. Currently, we have over 30 doctoral programs, plus a growing number of master's programs, and more than 30 research centers, institutes, and initiatives. We have about 3,200 doctoral and master's students taught by more than 130 faculty appointed at the Graduate Center, and more than 1,700 consortial or campus faculty that come from the City University of New York. And all of them are able to make requests via our interlibrary loan services. So because of that, and the focus on doctoral education and the large number of faculty and doctoral students, we receive interlibrary loan requests that cover a really large range of materials. We find very little concentration and a very diffuse pattern. As far as our copyright process goes, we have always done a periodical review. Sometimes it's been annual, sometimes it's been 6 months. It has gone back and forth, but essentially we have always done a periodical review, and we have made payments to the Copyright Clearance Center and occasionally use document delivery services as needed. Previously, though, it was the ILO department who led the review. We almost exclusively reviewed the spreadsheet of requests for the period that we were considering. And then we applied the CONTO guideline of 5, and then we submitted copyright payments. In the new policy, which we worked on for many months, and we deliberated and updated it, and finally started implementing it in November 2020, the review is a lot broader. So the new process is that the spreadsheet of requests is now reviewed not only by the ILO department, but by the collections department and the collections committee. And they're also the lists can be forwarded to subject liaisons as well. So what we do in those reviews is that we consider the number of requests and the appropriateness of the journal to be added to our collection, the journal subscription costs, and whether the journal is even available in the first place for licensing or purchase. Whenever we find that the use is excessive, the titles are also sent back to the ILO department to process copyright payments. So what we have learned now that it's been about 3 years of this cycle is that we very rarely borrow from any single journal in significant quantities. I think we knew this just from observation, but it was very stark to see the numbers. For example, in 2022 to 2023, the most requested journal had been requested 9 times, which is not actually a huge amount if you think about it. And the next most frequently requested were 9 journals that were all requested 6 times each, which is a small amount considering current subscription prices for each journal. They were far from substituting from a subscription, not even close. Even though our collections folks ended up considering the journals anyway, in case there were good candidates for adding to our collection. In terms of the review that we did, it was really interesting to see the actual numbers. And if you think about it, this makes sense for a graduate institution where the majority of requesters are doctoral students and faculty in the humanities and social sciences, because they do research in a great variety of very specific subjects and topics. So there are very few repeats. It also confirmed to us that interlibrary loan is absolutely the right tool to serve some of the particular needs of our institution, that we can never fulfill the needs of our community by journal subscriptions alone. And finally, we found that the new policy really better supports our collection development by putting journals in the radars of decision makers. So that is it for me. These are the references. I do encourage you to maybe screenshot this and check out the papers if you're interested. And yeah, I want to just encourage you to look out for our lightning round virtual discussion. I think it might happen Thursday, this Thursday at 11:05 Pacific time, but it will be in the schedule. And also this year in the ALA RUSA first ILO discussion group will be on this topic itself, on implementation of alternatives to Cantu, and it will bring together a lot of the folks that I cited here. So please join us there as well. It's on Tuesday, October 15th, 2 p.m. Eastern, and you will see that around in the listservs. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I look forward to hearing them, and also any commentary or suggestions as well. Thank you. Bye.